Okay, in order to study for anything, right, there are like a couple of levels of what you need to know. First, you need to know like the basic definitions that we go through in class. That is step one. If you don't know what the words mean, you're going to have a hard time on the test. And some of you who have been kind of sporadic in the amount of time you call in have learned this the hard way. You get to the unit test and you're like, I don't know anything. It's like, yeah, because you haven't been in class. That makes sense. So knowing things is the first thing. If you see vocabulary that you don't know, it is important for you to write it down along with a definition. There's like really no other way for it to like get into your brain and stay there in any sort of a meaningful way. Talking about things that you know is a great way to actually make sure that they stay in your head and that you actually learn them. The best way to learn something is to teach, actually. So talking to each other is a way that you can accomplish that. Teaching your little like siblings world geography against their will is a great way of accomplishing that too. On the test as well, you're going to have to like go a couple of levels up. So it's not just like knowing definitions and being able to describe them. You're going to need to be able to apply what you've learned. So, you know, recognizing different kinds of economic systems from a source, not just like by their definition. And then also ideas in the writing I saw yesterday from a lot of you was pretty encouraging. So I think that we're going to do kind of okay. I want to just like briefly review Unit 1 information because it's been forever and we can knock this out pretty quick and you guys feel pretty confident in it. If you are confident that you remember stuff about physical and human geography from Unit 1 and you just want to get started on the classwork, you feel free to do that. However, I think that since it's been so long, this might be useful for some of y'all, especially those of y'all who may not have been as motivated to pay attention in the beginning of the year. What I suggest is when I say something that you haven't heard before, or if I use a vocabulary word that is new for you, write it down because these are really the basics. And if you don't know this stuff, the rest of it's going to be kind of hard. At least write down the word, right? The copies of these slides are in your notes, in your OneNotes. So writing down the word makes you a list of things to study, and that's kind of where we want you guys to be. So I will just start. If you have questions, put them down in the chat. If you want to go ahead and start the classwork today, totally fine. At the very beginning of the year, we learned about physical and human geography first. The difference between physical geography, which is all about the natural features of the Earth, landforms, topography, climate, natural resources, like the rock that we're on, the way that it is without us messing with it too much. That's physical geography. Human geography is all people, how they react with their place and make new cultures and societies of their own. So human geography is about how human societies in different regions of the world are different from each other and why. And that can be studying things like economics, cultures, politics, religions. That all falls under human geography. Human geography and physical geography influence each other, however. For example, which natural resources exist in a given place can affect the way societies develop, and the topography of a region, like we saw with our river valley civilization studies, right? They can really, really affect the way a society develops. Specifically, some features like rivers make it easier for societies to communicate over long distances and trade and have cultural diffusion. And some features like mountains, like the Sahara Desert for Egypt, make it hard for societies to interact with distant cultures, which can like protect them or it can keep them from learning and technologies. So double-edged sword. Human geography can also affect physical geography. We changed the Earth in order to live here. You can see that when we cut down forests to farm food, when we industrialize and cause climate change over years and years and years. That's human geography affecting the natural features and processes of the Earth, physical geography. We also learn about maps in Unit 1, different kinds of maps. And here, like maybe a key word next to each kind would be useful if you don't know these yet. Reference maps are all about location, right? Reference maps are the maps you pull out when you're like looking for a specific place and how to get there. There are a couple different kinds. Political maps are a type of reference map, and they find the location of like government borders. So where boundaries and locations of countries, states, cities, towns, counties, that sort of thing are. And these locations are generally determined by people, not by nature. So they reflect human geography, right? Because like the border between Texas and Mexico, it's something that humans decided is meaningful and exists. It's not like a natural feature of the earth. Physical maps are different. They're not all about finding location. They're all about telling us about the natural world. They focus on geographic features like mountains, valleys, rivers, deserts, etc. So different. Reference maps show us a location. Physical maps show us the natural features of the earth. And then a third kind of map, thematic maps, are mostly used to give the viewer a lot of information all at once about a specific place, focusing on a specific theme or subject area. So this can show like, you know, climate maps, population maps. At the bottom right of the slide, you have a map of hamburger consumption across the world. Those are thematic maps because they're about a theme. Maps often have symbols that mean something on them, and those symbols are defined in the map's key, which shows what different symbols mean. A map's scale is something else that you'll find. It shows like how long a distance would be in real life. So that is all about maps. And if my PowerPoint would let me click forward, this would be a lot easier. There we go. Okay, so on this slide, you'll see a physical map of Asia on the top left, showing you very clearly where like stuff is green. That means you can probably grow food. Where stuff is brown, it's probably a desert or a mountain range. Physical map shows you the natural features. Under that, you have a map of world religions. That is a thematic map, right? Because it gives us information about a specific theme, world religions. To the right, we have a map of COVID trend states. Be very familiar with this. And at the moment in Texas, this thematic map tells us that we are in a period of uncontrolled spread for COVID, which is not great. On the top right, we have another thematic map that shows us population densities. Each section of that map contains 10% of the world's populations. As you guys can tell, I'm kind of obsessed with thematic maps. I think they're fun to look at. Okay, we also studied climate and latitude and like the relationship between a place's location, its climate, its weather patterns. So climate is the study of temperatures and weather patterns over long periods of time. So not just one day to the other. It snowed in Houston before, not often, right? That's part of our weather. That's like an isolated event. Climate is long patterns over long periods of time. We don't have a snowy climate in Houston. We have a very tropical, hot and humid climate in Houston. Climate is affected by a place's latitude. Remember, latitude are those lines that go around the Earth. They're not real lines. We've imagined them because it helps us explain things. But like around the middle of the Earth, around the belly. When I was in world geography, my geography teacher told me to remember this because latitude sounds kind of like fat, and that you measure fat by like a place going around the belly. Horrible way to remember it, but I've never forgotten, have I? So here I am telling you. Latitude tells you a lot about a place's weather and climate. And the equator, the line running through the middle of the Earth, there's an arrow pointing to it on the slide, is kind of the key to that. The closer you are to the equator, the hotter the climate tends to be. The farther you are from the the colder the climate tends to be. Latitude also helps explain a region's ability to grow crops, to have agriculture, to farm, which, as we saw when we studied the Neolithic Revolution, is really the key to human settlement. Temperate climates are kind of the Goldilocks zone for agriculture. They're not too hot, they're not too cold. They're close enough to the equator to still get some heat, but they're not like scorching hot. They're not freezing like the Arctic. So temperate climates that are conducive to agriculture, that are possible to grow food in, tended to attract the most people. So places with the highest population density tend to be in these temperate zones between 20 degrees and 60 degrees north. When I say that, I'm talking about latitude. Another good way of remembering latitude, I'm getting from Caesar in the chat, is lat, L-A-T, are the last words of horizontal, but like backwards. So if you think like Caesar, that's a great way of thinking about it without ever having to mention the word fat, which is much better. Right, we've also learned about natural resources, which help explain a lot of what we find in human-environment interaction, that people and their environment affect one another. Natural resources are valued elements of the environment. They're the raw materials, minerals, water, vegetation, and soil. They're the stuff the earth gives us that we use to survive and to make new technology. Natural resources, as we know, are scarce. That means that there's not an unlimited supply of them. They are limited in quantity. There's not enough of everything. And that means that people have had to work out how to live with scarce resources, how to make choices about using scarce resources, in particular environments and also in general. In terms of human-environment interaction, people tend to deal with scarce resources by adapting to their environment, so by changing their lifestyle to fit the place that they live, or by modifying the environment themselves, by changing the place to make it more livable. So scarcity and natural resources are a huge concept. As Isabella notes, they are the opposite of surplus. A great way of remembering those two together. And if we think ahead to our study of economics, economics is all about making choices about how to use scarce resources. So those two things tie together. In Unit 1, we also learned about isolation and diffusion. Isolation is when a place is all by itself without a lot of interaction with other places. Diffusion is the spread of ideas, culture, technology, trade, disease from one place to another. So why are some places in the world isolated? Why are others very, very interconnected? Historically, before modern technology, the best way of explaining this has to do with topography. Topography is the arrangement of natural and artificial features on the Earth's surface. So mountains, rivers, valleys, volcanoes, whatever, like it's the stuff on the Earth, the natural surface of the Earth. Some of these features, as we have learned, make it hard for societies to communicate, leading to cultural isolation, like mountains, for example, or giant deserts like the Sahara Desert for Egypt. Other features make communication a lot easier, like rivers, trade networks, which are man-made, but they usually are affected by topography, if you can trade in a place or not. They tend to lead to cultural diffusion, so the spread of culture from one place to the other. And as you'll see as we go through the history part of this course, over time, increasingly, technology increases diffusion, makes it easier for societies to communicate over long distances. And that started with the wheel, but it continued with sailing, cars, telecommunications, flights, all that good stuff. In Unit 1, we also learned about human-environment interaction, which, as I've already said, relates to how people adapt to, depend on, and change or modify their environment. Human-environment interaction is like the link between physical geography, the Earth itself, the natural Earth, and human geography, the way people live on it in different societies. Like we said before, natural resources and the problem of scarcity shape the way that human societies develop and interact. In terms of interactions, we know that when natural resources are scarce, people tend to compete for those resources, and if they have a military that, they tend to use it, often leading to war. We know that some states historically tended to want to expand their access to natural resources by conquering other states, and when they do that, they create a giant state that's called an empire. There's some positive ways that this can happen too, though, in places where there is a surplus or extra of a resource. People in that place can sell the surplus, sell the extra, using trade networks. So trade networks are a very peaceful way for societies to deal with the problem of scarcity. And then finally, the last big vocabulary word for Unit 1 was demography. DEMO is a root that usually relates to the people. We know democracy is the rule by the people. So demography is the study of human populations. That means like the size of populations and why they change, including birth rate, death rate, immigration, and emigration, and the spatial organization of the population. That means like how they're distributed or scattered through Earth. Are they clustered together in high population densities? Are they spread really far apart like hunter-gatherers used to be in very low population densities? And how that changes over time too. And as I said before, spatial organization is all about how a group or phenomena, the thing, is arranged on the surface of the Earth.